You need to get her off that porch now, or I'm calling the police. That was the first thing out of Darla Whitcomb's mouth. No greeting, no decency. Just her pointing at my pregnant wife like she was trash left out for too long. Maya didn't flinch. She was too focused on keeping her breathing steady, ankles swollen from the heat. She doesn't live here, Darla added, smug and sharp, holding a clipboard like a weapon. And per HOA bylaw 7.3.2, non-residents aren't allowed to loiter on common-facing structures. I didn't even look at her. I just handed Maya a bottle of cold water and said, calm as ever. She's listed on the property deed, and her Department of Homeland Security credentials beat your clipboard. That's when Darla's mouth twitched. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. Name's Nate Ellison. I don't scream, I don't bark back. I work quietly as a federal cybersecurity auditor. I track vulnerabilities for a living, and I'd already spotted Darla's. You see, that porch swing she hated so much, it's older than her entire HOA charter. My grandfather built it, every bolt of it. He left me this house when he passed, and my wife and I moved in to raise our first child here, his first great-grandchild. Maya's 8 months along. The porch is the only place where her sciatica eases. She can breathe out here. She can sleep a little. Darla's notice said she was lingering inappropriately, as if growing a human being required clearance. I asked her, would you like to call now, or after I record your statement for DHS? She hesitated, blinked, then pulled out her phone and dialed anyway. 2 cruisers showed up within 5 minutes. I stayed seated, let them walk up the path. Shoes crunching on the gravel, my grandfather laid himself in, 82. The younger officer reached for his belt until Maya stood. She didn't raise her voice. She just held out her ID. Analyst Maya Ellison, DHS Systems Division. This is my home. My name is on the mortgage. They glanced at it, then at each other. And without another word, they turned back toward their cruisers. Darla stepped forward, incensed. Are you seriously not removing her? She's not allowed to just sit here like some... Ma'am, we've reviewed the ID and deed access, one of the officers said flatly. This is her residence. They drove off. Darla didn't. She stood there for a beat too long, eyes twitching, then muttered something about bringing this up with the board. Then she stormed off toward the HOA office like she owned the entire block. Where are you watching from? Because this is just the first layer. What Darla didn't know, what she still doesn't know, is that the HOA surveillance software she installed last year. I wrote the firmware for the auditing tools they never patched. I've seen the way she manipulates timestamps. I've watched footage vanish midstream. And now, she's targeted the wrong woman on the wrong porch. This wasn't about a swing or bylaws. It was about control. But we're not going anywhere. That porch isn't just wood and chain. It's legacy. My grandfather used to sit there every Sunday with a glass of iced tea, waving at neighbors as they passed. The same neighbors Darla now finds for faded mailbox paint and non-conforming wind chimes. She thinks we're just another family she can intimidate. But intimidation only works on the unaware, and I'm a man who reads audit logs for a living. This question mark, this is the part where I start pulling threads. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to stand up to unreasonable rules like this, and subscribe to see how this strategy plays out. Because this isn't the first time Darla's abused her power, and I'm about to make sure it's the last. The notice was taped to our door the next morning, standard HOA envelope, typed in that polite but menacing legalese they love. Violation notice, unauthorized resident presence on common-facing porch area. Second warning. Second? There'd never been a first. Maya read it once, then set it down on the kitchen counter with a quiet, "They're escalating." I knew. That's what bothered me. I didn't expect Darla to back down after the cops left yesterday. But doubling down like this, filing an official violation when she'd just been embarrassed on our lawn, that was vindictive, and she wasn't doing it in a vacuum. I headed out to the community center that afternoon, HOA meeting day. No formal session on the calendar, but I knew better. The board always gathered informally on Thursdays to review paperwork, which meant strategizing out of public view. I walked in with a smile and zero announcement, sat in the back row of the empty room, while Darla, 2 board members, and a few hand-picked residents huddled near the coffee urn. I didn't need to speak, just needed to listen. They didn't see me until I cleared my throat. Afternoon. 3 of them jumped. Darla didn't flinch. She just turned and said, "This is a closed work session." I held up my phone. Section 4.5 of the Charter says any homeowner can attend board reviews unless the topic is financial or legal counsel. Since you're pouring coffee and printing agenda drafts, I figured this was still civil. She didn't like that. I could see it in the way her jaw flexed. "Do you have business with the board?" "Not yet." I folded my arms, just tracking patterns. That's when I started noticing the others. Residents I recognized, Ms. Carter from 3 houses down, fined for improper landscaping when her arthritis flared. The Chongs, who stopped using their driveway after being cited for parking at a slightly crooked angle. The woman with the twins, whose inflatable pool was tagged as a safety hazard. Darla didn't just make bad calls, she made it policy. And nobody ever pushed back hard enough to stop her. But now, people were looking up, whispering, meeting my eyes. She tried to end the meeting early, claimed she had urgent correspondence, and left mid-discussion. Outside, I lingered by the sidewalk under the ficus trees. Sure enough, one of the board members trailed behind her, slower on purpose. Gray polo shirt, clipboard under his arm. Julian Reyes, treasurer. I'd seen his name on letters, but never spoken to him directly. He looked back toward the center, then toward me. Hesitated. I nodded once, that's all. Didn't force a word. But he gave me a look. Uncertain. Uneasy. The kind of look someone gives when they know things are off, but don't yet have permission to say so. Noted. By the time I got home, Maya was resting on the porch again, feet propped up, the swing gently creaking. A new warning slip lay on the cushion beside her. "They came by while I was asleep," she said softly. Didn't knock, just dropped that and walked off. I picked it up. This time it said, "Final courtesy reminder. Unapproved porch usage. May incur fines of $100 per day." That's when something clicked. They were treating this like a paper war. Drown us in warnings, stack penalties, make us so uncomfortable we'd comply or move. But they weren't counting on someone who knows how to follow digital footprints. Because Darla wasn't just abusing power, she was building a record, and I planned to audit every single bite of it. Tomorrow, I'd be pulling metadata. But tonight, I sat beside my wife, let her lean on my shoulder, and listen to the old porch creak under generations of quiet defiance. The community thought Darla was untouchable. I was going to show them otherwise. Julian Reyes was waiting by the mailbox cluster the next morning, pretending to scroll through his phone. I didn't approach. I just opened our box, sifted through the flyers and thinly veiled threats, and waited. He didn't move until I turned to go. "I didn't approve the fine," he said quietly, eyes still on the screen. I paused. "What fine?" He finally looked up. "The porch one. I saw the form go through, but there was no vote. Darla marked it unilateral discretion under bylaws. That's not how it's supposed to work." His shoulders were tight, his voice flat, but his jaw worked like he was chewing on something sharp. I nodded once. "Appreciate the heads up." He hesitated. "I didn't say that." Then he walked off, quick and stiff, like the air itself might be listening. Julian was the one to watch, not just because he sat on the board, but because he was aware of how things should work, and that meant guilt. Maybe fear. Either way, that's where cracks begin. I spent the rest of the morning in the one place I knew Darla wouldn't think to look, the library over on Halston Drive. Quiet corner, free, Wi-Fi, and a terminal they never patched beyond Windows 10. It wasn't illegal to examine public community networks when you're on the authorized access list. And thanks to my HOA login credentials, given to every homeowner upon closing, I was well within bounds. The system, sloppy, same password reused, footage sliced like someone had something to hide. And guess what? They did, and surveillance timestamp logs cached into poorly structured directories. But that wasn't what made me sit back. The video footage. Every street-facing home had a corresponding camera file. Some showed entire days. Others, gaps, edits, snips so surgically done that only someone with back-end access could have created them. I clicked on ours. The file from 2 days ago, the 9/11 incident, had been uploaded, but the timestamps were scrubbed clean. You wouldn't even know the cops came. Maya's entire presence had been erased. But the system had one fatal flaw: backups. Obsolete footage had been shunted to a third-party mirror cloud, probably a cheaper storage plug-in Darla's vendor installed, and that backup didn't know it was supposed to hide anything. I found the raw feed, complete, unedited, including the moment Maya showed her ID, and the officer's face softened in immediate recognition. Darla's expression as they turned away from her? Priceless. I saved the clip to a secure drive, marked it for metadata audit later. The system showed more than erasure. It showed targeting. Several clips of the Chong family's driveway had been sliced, stitched, refiled under safety watch. A teenager playing basketball after 9 p.m. labeled loitering. Miss Carter's faded rose bush captured in a 6-second zoom clip that had no reason to exist. Darla wasn't protecting the neighborhood. She was surveilling it to create a paper trail that only she could interpret. I walked home under a slate-gray sky, wind dragging the edges of my jacket, the kind of weather that made porch swings groan like memory. Maya was inside this time, resting, but Julian was back, standing at the sidewalk, arms crossed, watching our porch like it held answers he didn't want. I joined him. "You knew she'd erase it," he said. I didn't answer. I just unlocked my phone and played the raw clip, turning the screen so he could see the original footage. He swallowed. "That's not standard operating procedure. Neither is marking fines without board review." He didn't speak for a moment. Then, "She says it's about neighborhood safety. Presentation, order, but it's about control." He looked down, fidgeted with his wedding ring. "I've got 2 daughters. They play on that sidewalk every afternoon. If she's cutting clips like this..." His words trailed off. That was all I needed to hear. I handed him a copy of the footage on a thumb drive. "Think about how long you want to be tied to this. You don't have to decide now." Julian stared at it like it might burn him, but he didn't give it back. He just walked away slower this time. The guilt was growing, and so was the gap in Darla's armor. She'd built this HOA like a digital fortress, but she forgot some of us wrote the maps that show you where the weak walls are. Drop a like if you've ever dealt with a rulebook weaponized by someone who doesn't play fair, and subscribe because the next move's already in motion. By Saturday morning, the envelope was red. Notice of daily penalty accrual, $100 per day until violation is resolved. Maya stared at it from the kitchen table, one hand absently tracing the condensation from her water glass, the other resting on the curve of her belly. "They're really trying to push us out," she murmured. I didn't answer. I was already watching the live security feed from our front porch on my laptop. The HOA's stream, poorly secured, still pinged back to my shadow server, where I'd been running my own archive in parallel. 2 hours ago, someone from the HOA office had walked by with a tablet, paused at the porch, and taken 3 separate photos. The swing, the cushion, the iced tea glass we'd forgotten to bring in. They were documenting for escalation. I closed the laptop and stood. It's time to show them what documentation really looks like. I headed straight to the HOA office, not during a meeting, but in the middle of the day, when Darla would least expect confrontation. The building sat wedged between the tennis courts and the pool house, designed like a mini courthouse with plastic columns and a keycard gate that had never worked properly. The receptionist was new, nervous. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Can I help you?" I smiled politely. "I'm here to inspect the HOA's compliance logs and digital surveillance archives per homeowner rights under Section 3.8. She blinked. I think you need an appointment. I've already submitted a written request. By law, you have 5 business days. This is day 6. The door to the back office opened. Darla's heels clicked before she even appeared. "Mr. Ellison," she said crisply, "we're not equipped to hand over sensitive logs without review." "That's fine," I replied, pulling out a folder. "I've brought my own. Your system uses NetPin Cloud for backups, right? The version before they patched out the auto-mirroring vulnerability?" Her smile flickered. I laid the printed screen caps on the receptionist's desk, timestamps, footage discrepancies, and the raw clip of Maya's erased porch scene. "These are public records," I said quietly, "and they show your office has been deleting footage, applying fines without review, and tagging residents under fabricated code violations. The metadata proves unauthorized tampering from your admin account. Darla's hands tightened around her tablet. You're making dangerous assumptions, she said. No, I said, evenly. I'm presenting digital facts, and I've just filed them with the city's ethics compliance portal, but I came here first, to give you the chance to stop this before it becomes public. Darla didn't respond, but the receptionist's hands were trembling as she reached for the papers. Outside, the air felt sharper. Across the street, I spotted the Chang family raking leaves together. Miss Carter's grandkids were chalking smiley faces on the sidewalk. A few doors down, the woman with the twins stood on her porch, phone in hand, probably filming me as I walked back toward home. People were watching now. Back at the house, Maya met me at the door. Her eyes searched mine. You did something. I nodded. I didn't break anything. I just reminded them I know how it all works. She smiled faintly. And if they keep pushing, they won't. Because now I had proof, not just of unfair targeting, but of a deliberate pattern of abuse, carried out through surveillance tools that Darla never expected anyone in the neighborhood could understand. But I did. That's what they never consider. People like me, quiet, technical, observant. They think we won't push back because we don't shout. But I don't need to shout. I just need access. And Darla had given me all the access I needed. The house was quiet when I woke up the next morning, too quiet. No birds, no hum of neighbors' sprinklers, no breeze rocking the porch swing, just a kind of manufactured stillness, like the air was holding its breath. I stepped outside with my coffee and saw it. A small black camera, mounted on a utility pole across from our driveway, angled directly at our front porch. Not one of the old HOA dome cameras. They had been installed years ago and barely functioned. This one was new, sleek, hardwired. Someone had upgraded the system. I walked over, crossed the street, and looked closer. A fresh cabling track snaked up the side of the pole, poorly concealed by faux wood paneling. HOA work for sure, but this hadn't gone through a vote. I would have heard about it. Darla was doubling down. But what she didn't realize is, in surveillance, every new device creates a new vulnerability. Back inside, I powered up my laptop, tunneled through the mirrored feed I'd quietly established a week ago, and traced the device's network signature. Static IP assigned through a masked gateway, but the stream headers? Amateur stuff. The encoding was sloppy. Standard netpin overlay, no compression, no firewall. I copied the feed and ran a checksum, then compared it to the system logs I'd pulled 2 days prior, and there it was. The live feed showed Maya stepping onto the porch an hour ago, adjusting the swing cushion. She hadn't even sat yet, just shifted it. But the HOA violation report that hit my email this morning? Resident captured loitering for extended period. Excessive exterior dwelling usage. Timestamp. 5 minutes before she even opened the door. They weren't just spying. They were falsifying footage. I leaned back in my chair, heart thudding. Not from fear, from clarity. This wasn't incompetence anymore. It was calculated. I pulled out my audit tools, cross-referenced the log data, and extracted the embedded stream ID. The camera had been registered under a separate contract, HOA Systems Maintenance, with billing routed through a company named Monitech Integration, LLC. I'd never heard of it, but when I checked the vendor registration site, the tax ID was linked to a residential address in Houston belonging to Eli Whitcomb, Darla's son. My stomach went still. Not with shock, but with confirmation. She wasn't just targeting us. She was laundering money through a fake tech vendor, billing the HOA to spy on homeowners, and using that footage to issue violations, then scrubbing the evidence when it suited her. This was criminal-level misuse. I documented everything: stream headers, invoice pathing, registration records, and all footage files, then encrypted it twice, sent one copy to a secure backup server, and one to a lawyer friend of mine who owed me a favor from an old contract breach case. Then I sat down next to Maya, who was now half dozing on the couch. "Did you sit outside this morning?" I asked gently. She nodded. "Just for a second. Why?" I showed her the email violation. Her face changed, not with fear, but exhaustion. She was tired of being watched, tired of defending her right to exist peacefully in her own home. "Do we have anything yet?" she asked. I nodded once. "We do now." That night, I went back to the library, the same seat, Same dusty corner. I logged into the public HOA site, the homeowner portal, pulled the latest vendor expenses report Darla had uploaded. $12,400 paid out last quarter to HOA systems maintenance for security upgrades. The same company tied to her son's name, the same camera system streaming into my house. I screen captured every line. By the time I shut the laptop, I wasn't even angry anymore. I was surgical. Because now I had more than digital manipulation. I had a financial trail. They say HOA power games are just neighborhood squabbles. But when they install surveillance pointed at your wife, falsify timestamps, and funnel HOA dues through their family's shell company, that's not a squabble. That's a takedown waiting to happen. I didn't sleep that night, not from stress, but from calculation. Every move Darla had made was part of a pattern. She thought she was covering her tracks by controlling the board and scrubbing footage. But in the digital world, nothing truly disappears. Every packet leaves a fingerprint. And I had enough fingerprints now to build a case that would rattle the whole subdivision. By morning, the sky was that pale, colorless gray that feels like a prelude to something. Maya was still asleep, one hand on her stomach, breathing slow and steady. I watched her for a moment, then stood up and slipped into the garage, not for old papers, but for something newer. My scanner, the one I used when working from home, government grade, calibrated for metadata integrity. I laid out the HOA vendor invoices I'd downloaded, alongside the screenshots of the falsified footage. Every line of documentation got its own time-stamped digital copy, hashed and sealed. The violation Darla sent yesterday, it had been registered in the system before the footage it cited even existed. That was the kind of sequencing error any federal auditor would catch in 5 minutes. I just needed someone to hear it. That's when I remembered Julian. I hadn't seen him since I handed him that thumb drive with the raw porch footage. He hadn't responded. No messages, no knocks. But something told me he hadn't walked away from this. I grabbed a folder, hard copies just in case, and headed out. Julian lived 2 blocks over, near the retention pond. His lawn was the only one in the neighborhood not aggressively manicured, which I respected. When I knocked, the door opened halfway, chain still on. He looked tired. "You really need to stop showing up at my door with flash drives, Nate," he muttered. "I didn't bring one this time," I said. "Just the truth." He hesitated, then closed the door, undid the chain, and let me in. The inside of his house was quiet, too quiet for a man with 2 young daughters. I noticed their shoes by the door, no toys out. No cartoons, just silence. "She's targeting everyone," I said plainly. "I have proof the security contractor's registered to her son. And the footage? It's been falsified." He didn't speak for a moment. Then he walked over to the fridge, pulled out a bottle of water, and sat at the kitchen table. "I knew something was off," he said finally. "The invoices never made sense. I asked her for the original receipts once. She said the vendor doesn't itemize due to national security system confidentiality." I snorted. "Classic." He looked down. "I didn't push. I didn't want to complicate things." "You mean you didn't want to be next?" I said. He winced but didn't deny it. I slid the folder across the table. "This is a full breakdown. Network logs, invoice trails, domain registration, and a printout of the video they tried to erase. My wife sitting on our porch, doing nothing." He opened it slowly, read the first few pages. His hand went still on the paper. "She's going to bury this," he said. "She'll call an emergency board session, seal the records, spin it as malicious hacking. She won't get the chance," I cut in, "because I've already filed a provisional ethics complaint with the city's homeowner regulatory committee. But they'll move faster if they hear from someone on the board." Julian looked up at me. "I can't testify outright," he said. "Not yet, but if you need internal approval logs, meeting transcripts, finance access..." He paused. "I can get you in." That was enough. Drop a like if you've ever seen the moment someone finally decided to do the right thing, and subscribe, because what comes next is going to change everything. I stood, nodded once, and left him at the table with the folder. Back home, Maya was awake, leaning against the porch post with a mug of tea, her eyes following the same camera I'd traced the day before. "Did he help?" she asked. I nodded. "He will." The wind picked up just slightly, moving the porch swing in a lazy arc. "He's scared," I added. "But he's tired of being quiet." Maya reached for my hand. So are we. I looked up at the sky, the clouds beginning to shift, and realized I didn't feel like I was waiting anymore. I was moving. And Darla? She was about to learn what happens when you surveil a man trained to follow digital shadows straight to the source. Drop a like if you've ever watched someone finally crack the wall of silence. And subscribe, because this isn't just about one camera anymore. This is about every dollar she's stolen while threatening the people who paid it. Julian showed up at my door just after 9 the next morning, wearing a windbreaker and a look like he hadn't slept in days. He didn't wait for an invitation, just stepped inside, shut the door, and held out a flash drive. I pulled it off the internal finance terminal while Darla was in her car on a call, he said, voice low. Board admin password hasn't changed in over a year. Whitcomb 2022. I took the drive carefully, not out of fear of being caught, out of respect for what it meant. Julian had finally crossed the line. This wasn't just disapproval anymore, it was defection. What am I looking for? I asked, already sliding it into my encrypted laptop. Expense reports, board votes, vendor logs, and something else, he added, eyes narrowing. She signed off on a maintenance reimbursement last quarter for $5,000, marked as emergency street repair. I frowned. There haven't been any street repairs. I know, but there's a canceled check in the files, handwritten, made out to herself. That stopped me cold, a direct withdrawal, paper trail. You realize what this is? I said slowly. This isn't just misuse of surveillance. This is embezzlement. Julian sat down, rubbing his palms against his knees like he was trying to scrub off the guilt. She's been running this HOA like her personal fiefdom for years. We thought she just liked control, but it's money. It's always been about money. The documents were all there. Unauthorized expenditures bundled with vague line items, reimbursements with no work orders, maintenance fees paid to entities registered to family members, and all of it passed without official board votes, because Darla had begun signing off items herself under executive authority. Julian leaned over. She's been falsifying minutes too. I checked last month's meeting log. She wrote that the board approved a new motion to install smart fencing along the east cul-de-sac. We never voted. It didn't even come up. I was already compiling the files, arranging them by timestamp, cross-referencing video logs and financial transactions. Each misstep connected to a specific abuse. Surveillance leading to citations, citations leading to fines, fines funding the very tech used to target us again. It was a cycle, one she controlled entirely, until now. You said you couldn't testify, I said. But if I present this, she'll claim it's tampered with. I need someone internal to verify chain of custody. Just a signed affidavit that this came from HOA servers and that you pulled it. He hesitated. My name goes on that, he said slowly. And if she loses power, sure. But if she doesn't? I've got kids, Nate. I know, but think about what she'll do if nobody stops her. Your girls are next. That hung in the air. Julian stared at the wall for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and handed it to me. I already wrote it. It was signed, dated, notarized by a friend of his at the city clerk's office. I looked up. You're all in. He nodded once. Either we clean this out now, or we spend the next 10 years watching our neighbors get crushed by it. I pressed my thumb to the printout and said quietly, You just bought us the credibility we needed. By noon, I'd uploaded everything to my secure report system. Files, screen recordings, photos, and Julian's affidavit. I drafted a formal complaint packet to the city's HOA Oversight and Ethics Committee. Maya helped me edit the language. Clear, direct, irrefutable. Darla won't go quietly, she said, as we reviewed the packet one final time. She doesn't have to, I replied. She just has to go. That night, I printed 25 sealed copies. One for every household in the community. No rhetoric, just evidence. I slid them into envelopes marked "For Your Information" and set them beside the door. Tomorrow, I'd start walking them house to house. Because power built on secrecy can't survive exposure. And thanks to Julian, we'd just turned the lights all the way on. The printer in the guest room clicked and hummed like a quiet warning drum, spitting out each final copy of the packet as I cross-checked names, dates, and links. By morning, I had 25 sealed envelopes lined up in clean rows on the dining table. Each one contained 3 things: Darla's falsified invoices, Julian's affidavit, and a raw screenshot of Maya sitting peacefully on our porch, time-stamped with the footage Darla tried to delete. I'd learned early in my career, a single screenshot can say more than 1,000 arguments, especially when it shows a pregnant woman being surveilled like a threat in her own home. Maya stood beside me, flipping through one of the packets slowly. "You sure about this?" she asked. "I'm sure they need to see it," I replied. "We've been defending ourselves in private. That ends now." She closed the folder and nodded. "Let's give them the truth then." I started on our street first, left the envelopes in mailboxes, clipped to storm doors, tucked under welcome mats. I didn't hide my face. I wanted the Ring cameras to catch me, wanted Darla to see me delivering receipts before she had a chance to spin the narrative. By the time I reached the 5th house, Ms. Carter was already outside. "Mr. Ellison," she said gently, voice thin but clear. "I just opened mine." Her hands trembled slightly as she held up the packet. "You mean to tell me this woman's been fining me for 2 years using fake footage?" "She's been targeting residents," I confirmed, "and billing the HOA through a fake vendor tied to her son." She gave a short, bitter laugh. "She fined me for my porch cushions fading too fast, said it lowered property values. She's been falsifying timestamp logs to match whatever story she wants to tell." Ms. Carter looked down at the pages again, then back at me. "You're going to bring this to the meeting?" I nodded. "The next HOA session is public, and I'm requesting a homeowner presentation slot." "Good," she said firmly. About time somebody fought back. By mid-afternoon, I'd finished both sides of our block. Julian messaged me once, just a thumbs-up emoji, no words. But I knew he was watching, waiting. That evening, I logged into the HOA portal again and submitted my official request, a 10-minute presentation at the upcoming board meeting. No reason listed, no details previewed, let them wonder. Then I sent a courtesy email to the entire board with a single attachment. A JPEG still of the forged invoice signed by Darla. No text, no explanation, just that image. I didn't need to say anything. The date alone was enough to break her whole house of cards. That night, Maya and I sat on the porch together, under the amber glow of the recessed lights. The wind was gentle, tugging faintly at the corners of the cushions. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel watched. I felt seen. Across the street, the Chongs gave a small wave. Further down, a teenager from Lot 14 knocked on our door and handed me a USB. "I screen-recorded a Zoom board meeting last month," he said. "Thought it might help." They didn't know I was still logged in. Inside the file, Darla, speaking plainly about editing problem footage before public review. That was the final lock sliding open. The next morning, I finalized my digital deck. 30 slides, clean visuals, no fluff. Metadata trails, invoice inconsistencies, vendor registration to Eli Whitcomb, Julian's notarized affidavit, surveillance footage, edits before violation timestamps, all of it tied to one theme: patterned misuse of authority and HOA funds. I saved the deck to 3 devices, uploaded a copy to a secure drive, printed 10 handouts for anyone who might want to follow along, and just for good measure, I set an automated email to send it to the city's ethics committee 30 minutes after the meeting began. If they tried to shut me down, they'd already be too late. This wasn't a protest. This was an audit. And the difference? An audit leaves nothing standing that was built on fraud. The morning of the HOA meeting, I woke up before the sun. Maya was still asleep, one arm curled around her belly, her breath steady. I stayed for a moment, watching her in the pale light before slipping downstairs. I didn't want her to feel the weight of today. That part was mine to carry. At the dining table, my materials were already in order. 10 printed presentation decks. My laptop loaded with the slides, 2 flash drives, one for the HOA projector, the other as backup. Julian had sent me a confirmation at 3 a.m. "Board acknowledged your 10-minute slot." No objections yet. I stepped out onto the porch and watched the neighborhood stir to life. Lawnmowers hummed somewhere distant. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically across manicured lawns. Normalcy, polished, pleasant, and fake. Beneath that calm was everything Darla had built. Fear disguised as order, compliance sold as standards. But today, the script flipped. By mid-morning, I started walking again. This time, not to deliver envelopes, but to collect quiet affirmations. Miss Carter nodded from her rose bushes. The Changs gave me a thumbs up as I passed. At least a dozen neighbors had messaged me overnight. Short words of support, offers to attend, quiet apologies for staying silent so long. But I didn't need them to speak. I just needed them to witness. At noon, I drove across town to a quiet legal services firm and walked into a small office where a city-certified paralegal reviewed my packet. Julian had requested the visit. "I just want to make sure everything's valid," he'd said, "so no one can call it hearsay." The woman flipped through the documents slowly, methodically. "Who compiled all this?" she asked. "I did," I said. "I'm a federal cybersecurity auditor. I deal in digital forensics." She looked up at me then, and her tone shifted. "Well," she said, initialing the chain of custody section, "then this is going to be a problem for her." By 4 o'clock, I was back home, dressed in a collared shirt and slacks, laptop bag slung over my shoulder. Maya stood by the door, steady despite the heaviness in her body. "Make it count," she said softly. I leaned down, kissed her forehead. "I'm not just doing this for us." She smiled faintly. "I know, that's why it's going to work." The HOA clubhouse looked different that evening, usually half empty and fluorescent tonight. It was packed. Neighbors lined the walls, folding chairs filled with familiar faces. Even some of the usually quiet residents, like Mr. Vasquez from the end of the cul-de-sac, were there, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Darla stood at the front, flanked by the remaining board members. She wore her usual pearls, a crisp blazer, and that same brittle smile she used like armor, but her eyes flicked toward me the moment I stepped in, and this time she blinked. Julian was seated to her left. When I passed behind him, he slid me a printed sign-in sheet. "Official speaker," it read, next to my name. No turning back now. The meeting began as expected. Routine updates, landscaping budget, pool repairs. Darla's voice was smooth, professional. But there was a tension in the room, a low hum of people waiting for what they really came for. Finally, during the homeowner statements section, Julian cleared his throat. "Mr. Ellison has a prepared statement and presentation," he said. 10 minutes per our bylaws." Darla tried to object. That wasn't the intent of this session, but it was too late. The room had shifted. People were watching her now, not me. I stepped forward, plugged in my drive. The projector lit up. Slide 1. Systematic misuse of authority and HOA funds. A forensic audit. I didn't look at Darla when I began. I looked at the neighbors. I wanted them to see this wasn't personal. It was procedural. Each slide was simple. A date, a line item, a clip of footage, a domain registration, a contract signed to her son's company, Julian's affidavit, notarized and verified, and then the final slide, a video of Maya, sitting on our porch, time-stamped, peaceful. I hit play. It was quiet enough to hear the projector fan. No one moved, then the screen cut to black, and the room erupted. Drop a like if you've ever stood at the edge of something and known the next step meant everything. And subscribe, because what happens next isn't a speech. It's exposure. For 3 full seconds, no one spoke. The last frame of the video still hovered on the screen. Maya resting on the porch, a quiet afternoon sliced into evidence. Then a voice rose from the back. "She fined me for porch sitting too," someone muttered. "She said my daughter's sidewalk chalk was graffiti," another added. Darla tried to regain control. "This is all out of context," she snapped, stepping forward. "You're not an accountant, Mr. Ellison. You're not qualified to assess." "I'm a certified federal cybersecurity auditor," I said calmly, loud enough for the room to catch every word. "I've spent 10 years auditing forensics trails in private and public institutions. This data isn't conjecture. It's digital chain of custody evidence, signed and notarized." Julian cleared his throat and rose slowly from his chair. "As treasurer, I can confirm these expense entries were never approved by vote. The documentation I provided, Mr. Ellison matches what I pulled directly from the board system under my own credentials." Darla's face froze. You gave him board data?" He didn't blink. "I verified misuse of funds under the transparency clause of Section 2.4.1. I acted within my rights as a board officer." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Residents leaned forward in their chairs. Phones were recording now. Someone in the front row said quietly, "She's finished." Darla's composure cracked. "This is a coordinated smear campaign," she hissed. "Probably doctored. He's got access. He could have manipulated all of it." I turned to the crowd. "If anyone doubts the files, I've sent an identical set to the city's HOA Oversight and Ethics Committee, including Julian's affidavit and the source footage. I've also mirrored the evidence to a secure legal archive in case of deletion." That silenced even the skeptics. She turned to the board. "You're seriously going to let this man slander me publicly?" But the board members were no longer looking at her. They were looking at the slide still frozen behind me. Check number 487, $5,000. Payable to Darla Whitcomb. Memo. Emergency curb repair. No receipt, no work order, no vote. Julian stepped up beside me. "I move for immediate suspension of Darla Whitcomb's authority pending external investigation," he said, voice steadier than I'd ever heard it. "Per section 3.9 of the HOA charter." The motion didn't hang in the air long. Another board member, a quiet woman named Renee, spoke next. "Seconded?" "Majority?" I asked, even though I already knew. Two other heads nodded. Darla turned pale. "You can't do this." "You did it to yourself," Julian said. The room buzzed with disbelief. Some residents clapped quietly. Others just stared, like they had been waiting years for this exact moment. I packed up my laptop as the board called for a temporary recess. Darla stormed out without looking back. Her pearls jangled against her collar like chains. Outside, neighbors stood in small circles. Some shook my hand. A few asked for copies of the evidence packet. One woman hugged Maya, who had shown up halfway through the meeting and stood silently at the back. "You didn't have to do this," she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "But we did." Back at home, we sat on the porch, our porch, the swing creaking gently as dust settled in. No cameras pointed at us now. I'd disabled the stream hours ago, firewalling every node Darla installed. The system would stay offline until the board restructured access. Maya leaned into me, hand resting on her belly. "Think she'll come back?" "Maybe," I said, "but she won't have power. Not anymore." The board had called for a formal vote to remove her permanently. The city ethics office had already replied to my complaint with confirmation of review. And Julian, he'd already started, drafting new guidelines for financial oversight. With my help. We weren't just cleaning up one mess. We were rebuilding the foundation. Because when someone abuses power this deeply, the cure isn't just removal, it's accountability. And for the first time since we moved in, I could breathe on my porch without looking over my shoulder. The board reconvened the following Thursday in the same clubhouse, but this time, everything felt different. No forced smiles, no clipped greetings, no clipboard ceremony, just tension, palpable, quiet, and coiled. I walked in early, Maya beside me, her steps slower now as the pregnancy reached its final stretch. Her presence wasn't for drama, it was for truth. She wanted Darla to see the face she'd tried to erase from the system, the woman she'd labeled a loiterer, a threat, a violation, and now, Maya was a witness. The room filled fast. More residents than I'd ever seen at a board meeting. People from every corner of Wellington Glade, some who'd kept their heads down for years, others who'd taken fines with silent resentment. But tonight, they were present, focused. Darla was already seated at the far end of the table, flanked by two silent board members who didn't meet her eyes. Her blazer was stiffer than usual, lips pressed into a fixed line. She'd been suspended but not yet removed, and she was clinging to what little control she had left. Julian stood to open the session. His voice didn't waver. "Tonight's agenda is singular. Per section 4.1 of the Wellington Glade Charter, we are conducting a formal vote for permanent removal of Darla Whitcomb from her role as HOA president due to misuse of authority, falsification of enforcement records, and unapproved expenditure of community funds." Gasps weren't theatrical anymore. They were earned. Darla leaned forward, tone sharp. "You're acting on fabricated evidence. I demand an independent forensic review." I rose. "You'll get one. The City Ethics Board already accepted my submission, and they've scheduled their preliminary audit of the HOA's financial records for next week. But you're not being removed because of that audit. You're being removed because your own treasurer confirmed your violations. I didn't raise my voice. I just opened the folder I'd brought and handed printed packets to each board member. Inside, Julian's notarized affidavit, the vendor trail, the backup surveillance logs, and a side-by-side comparison of falsified timestamps and real ones. No narration, just raw evidence. Julian looked around the room, then back at the table. I moved to vote. The silence in the room became a vacuum. No coughs, no side talk. Just the click of one pen on a clipboard, a small sound that felt deafening. Votes in favor of removal? 4 hands went up, fast, no hesitation. Then a 5th, Renee, slow but deliberate. Opposed? Only Darla's hand hovered midair, trembling slightly before. It dropped. 5 hands went up. 1 stayed down, hers. And in that silence, her whole empire cracked, as if her own body hadn't caught up to the loss yet. You can't just... You've already been suspended, Julian said, voice firmer than I'd ever heard it. This final vote removes your signature authority, access to HOA funds, and decision-making power, effective immediately. A resident in the 3rd row stood. What about the fines she issued? Julian nodded. The board will review all past violations issued under her name. Refunds and removals will be prioritized. Mr. Ellison has agreed to assist with the digital recovery process. People clapped, soft at first, then building. Not thunderous, just steady. Like relief finally had a rhythm. Darla rose. The room quieted again. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She walked out slowly. No shouts, no spectacle. Just silence trailing behind her like smoke. I exhaled. Maya squeezed my hand, her fingers warm, despite the cold tension that had lingered in my chest for weeks. Think that's it? She whispered. Not quite, I said, but it's the beginning. Outside, neighbors gathered in clusters. No one rushed home. They stood and talked, comparing citations, venting years of fear. Ms. Carter asked if we'd help her file a claim. The Changs offered to host a block gathering. Even the teen who'd screen recorded the Zoom call gave me a shy nod. This, I said to Maya, is what a neighborhood looks like when fear's been removed. She leaned against me, hand on her stomach. And what it should look like. Because what we won tonight wasn't just a vote. It was our peace. And no clipboard tyrant was ever going to take that from us again. The porch swing moved in slow rhythm, just barely brushing the edge of Maya's heel. Late evening settled around us, quiet but alive. The kind of quiet that comes after a fight, not before one. Behind the neighborhood's trimmed hedges and flower beds, things were changing. You could feel it. Not in the loud ways, there weren't parades or speeches, but in subtler signs. The watchful silences were gone. The sideways glances replaced with real eye contact. People waved again. People stayed. A knock came around 8. Julian stood on the step, not in his usual neutral expression, but with something close to relief. Board approved the first round of citation reversals, he said. 14 so far. We're prioritizing anyone fined under her discretionary surveillance clause. Maya looked up from her tea. That include faded porch cushions? He smiled, almost embarrassed. First name on the list was Ms. Carter. I opened the door wider and let him in. There wasn't ceremony in it, just ease. Like the storm had passed and now people could come through the front again. He stepped inside, dropped the envelope like it weighed more than it should have, and said, She forged the check no dramatics, just truth. Also, City Ethics Committee issued a preliminary response. They're moving forward with formal inquiry. Investigators will request Darla's records directly. We're not just removing her, we're setting a legal precedent. Good, I said. That's what the neighborhood deserves. Julian shifted his weight. And the HOA surveillance system? Wiped the bad nodes, I replied. Locked the rest behind multi-factor authentication. No more unauthorized edits. The audit trail's clean again. Drop a like if you've ever wanted to lock the doors from the inside for once, I added, just loud enough for Maya to hear. She shook her head, half laughing into her tea. After Julian left, we sat a while longer, letting the breeze speak for us. I glanced at the swing bolt, same one my grandfather tightened every spring with his old socket wrench. Still holding strong. Funny how the smallest things last longest. I'd spent weeks neck deep in footage, metadata, forged entries, and brittle power plays. I didn't expect it to feel like this at the end. No spotlight, no grand applause, just a front yard returned to its purpose, a wife resting easy. A child soon to be born into a home no longer watched like a crime scene. Across the street, porch lights flicked on. The Changs were playing catch in the driveway. Ms. Carter was watering her roses. For once, nobody looked over their shoulders. And Darla, the city had already confirmed they were issuing subpoenas. Her access was revoked, her influence gone. She wasn't at the center of things anymore, just another name under review. Good. Let her watch the neighborhood come back to life without her. Maya spoke first. Do you think anyone like her will try again? I considered that. Maybe, I said. But now they'll know we're not afraid to push back. And that changes everything? Because we didn't just remove Darla, we rewired the culture. We made sure the systems she corrupted were returned to transparency, not just vengeance. We didn't burn the house down. We flipped on the lights and made damn sure the locks only turn one way this time. Everyone deserves to feel safe on their own porch. If you've ever fought back against an unfair HOA or wanted to, drop your story in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Justice doesn't always knock. Sometimes you build the door.